The night sky above New York was supposed to be peaceful. The city lay draped in quiet, save for the distant hum of midnight traffic and the occasional siren. But then, the silence fractured, a low, unsettling hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the whir of a jet. No, this sound was alien, something beyond the comprehension of humanity. In the command center beneath the city, Captain Rourke stood at the front of the room, staring at the wide monitors that filled the wall. His face was grim, his expression hardened by years of war, but tonight something was different. A weight hung in the air, and it wasn't from the usual threats. The entire room held its breath as the first signal came through. "Sir, we've detected a fleet," reported Sergeant Wu, her voice steady despite the shock evident in her eyes. Her fingers danced across her tablet, pulling up a series of coordinates. "It's too large. We're looking at something massive." Rourke barely glanced at the screen. His eyes remained fixed on the blackness outside the fortified windows. He'd seen it all before: rogue states, insurrection, bioweapons, and anything else humanity could throw at itself. But this felt different. His instincts, honed through years of battle, told him that whatever this was, Earth was facing a threat far worse than anything they'd ever encountered. "How long until impact?" he asked, his voice calm, though his jaw was tight. 30 minutes, Wu replied, a slight tremor in her voice betraying her usual composure. "The fleet is entering the atmosphere." Rourke turned to face the rest of his team, his expression hardening. "Get them ready." Lena Wu's eyes flicked nervously to the corner of the room, where the rest of the unit was gathered. Private Elias Carter, the youngest member of their team, was pacing, looking far more anxious than the seasoned soldiers around him. He was barely old enough to legally drink, and this was his first real assignment in the field. His hands were shaking, and he was muttering to himself, trying to process the enormity of what was happening. But despite his nerves, his eyes held the fierce resolve of someone who knew he had a duty to fulfill. "Private Carter," Rourke barked. The young soldier snapped to attention. "You've trained for this. Whatever happens, you follow orders. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Elias replied, his voice cracking slightly. He nodded stiffly, though his fear was evident. "Stay focused. Everyone," Rourke continued, his gaze sweeping over the room, "we've faced down a lot of enemies, but nothing like this. The only thing that matters now is stopping them before they reach the heart of this city." The room fell silent, the air heavy with the weight of what was to come. Rourke nodded at Wu, signaling for her to take the lead. She didn't hesitate. "I've got a plan," Wu said, quickly laying out a series of tactical positions. Her brain was moving faster than any of them could keep up, connecting dots, analyzing threats. "We'll split into 2 teams. I'll take the tech team to the comms hub to try and block their signals. Rourke, you and Carter will provide backup. We'll need to buy some time." The team quickly fell into line, their minds focusing on the task at hand, shutting out the panic that threatened to creep in. Rourke watched them, his heart heavy. These weren't just soldiers to him, they were his family, and he would do whatever it took to keep them safe. As the team moved out, they stepped into the cold night air, the sound of their boots hitting the pavement like thunder in the quiet streets. Above, the dark sky seemed to crack open as dozens of unknown vessels streaked down, their shapes twisted and alien in design. They hovered with terrifying precision, like predators circling their prey. There was no mistaking it now, the invasion had begun. Rourke squinted into the darkness. He could feel the gravity of the situation, but he knew fear was the enemy. His team relied on him now more than ever. "Stay tight," he muttered under his breath. "We get through this together. No one gets left behind." Elias, now standing next to him, clenched his fists. The kid was scared, but Rourke could see it in his eyes. He was ready to fight. They all were. The first explosion rocked the street, sending them scrambling for cover. The sound was deafening, metal scraping against metal, a high-pitched screech that reverberated through the air. Rourke's heart raced. This was only the beginning. "Here we go," he said, his voice steady as a new round of explosions echoed in the distance. It was time. The war had begun. And for once, humanity would not be caught off guard. The night had become a war zone. The streets, once alive with the pulse of city life, were now deserted and dark, save for the occasional flare of distant explosions and the ominous hum of alien vessels overhead. Captain Rourke's team moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the chaos around them, but every soldier's mind was alert, hyper-aware of the dangers lurking in every corner. "We're close," Wu muttered, scanning her tablet. "The comms hub is 2 blocks down. We need to hit it before they establish a stronger hold on the city's network." Rourke nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the perimeter as they advanced. The air was thick with tension, but he could feel something else beneath it. The weight of responsibility. Humanity's fate hung on their ability to disrupt the enemy's command center. "I want eyes everywhere," he ordered. "Carter, stay on point. Wu, get that tech working." He turned to the rest of the unit, their faces set in determination. "We move fast. We hit hard. No second chances." Private Elias Carter, his grip tight on his rifle, nodded in silent acknowledgement. The kid wasn't quite a man yet, but there was a fire in his eyes now. He'd come a long way in the last few hours, evolving from nervous rookie to a soldier ready for battle. His boots hit the ground with purpose as he led the team forward, staying low and keeping a watchful eye on the shadows. Rourke took a deep breath, trying to steady the rush of adrenaline that had built up since the first explosion. It wasn't the first time he'd been in the heat of battle, but this felt different. The quiet before the storm was gone, replaced by an unrelenting pressure that built with each passing second. Suddenly, a series of high-pitched whines filled the air, signaling the approach of an alien patrol. Rourke raised a hand to stop the team, his fingers signaling for them to take cover. The noise grew louder, then silence. The aliens were close, too close. "They're circling," Wu said, her voice barely audible over the sound of her rapid typing. She looked up, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I've got the code. They're jamming our comms. I need 5 minutes to break through." "5 minutes is too long," Rourke replied, his voice tight. The stakes were too high. They couldn't afford to wait. "Then give me 2, Wu said, her determination unwavering. "Just enough to plant the virus in their system. 2 minutes. That's all I need." Rourke nodded grimly. "Do it." Without another word, Wu dropped to her knees and connected a small device to a nearby console, her fingers flying over the keys. The air was thick with tension as the team huddled around, waiting for the signal. Elias shifted nervously, his gaze flickering between Wu and the alley where the alien patrol was slowly advancing. His hand tightened on his rifle, but he didn't speak. He wasn't a kid anymore. He was part of this team, and he knew it. The alien footsteps grew louder, and Rourke's instincts kicked into overdrive. He glanced at Elias and gestured for him to stay put. There was no room for hesitation now. The hum of alien energy shields filled the air, a low, vibrating sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He knew they were outnumbered, but they had one advantage: they were human. They were unpredictable. They were relentless. "I'm in," Wu's voice broke through the tension, a small spark of hope. "I've breached their network. The comms are down." "Good," Rourke said, his lips curling into a grim smile. "Now let's take the fight to them." Without another word, Rourke signaled for the team to move. They sprinted into the fray, guns raised and ready. The alien patrol was directly ahead, its cloaked figures barely visible in the darkness. But the moment they stepped into the open, they became targets. Rourke's team opened fire, the sudden burst of gunfire piercing the night. The aliens didn't hesitate, they returned fire with unrelenting precision. Energy beams streaked across the street, illuminating the dark alleyway in flashes of green and blue. Rourke ducked behind a collapsed building, his breath steady as he fired into the advancing alien forces. "Carter, flank left." "Wu, on me," he ordered. The mission hadn't changed, they needed to disrupt the enemy's advance and buy enough time for the backup to arrive. Elias darted to the left, using the cover of nearby rubble to stay out of sight. His shots were steady, if a little shaky, but the aliens weren't pulling back. They were relentless, a tidal wave of superior technology crashing against humanity's last stand. Reloading. Elias called out, his voice rising above the chaos. Rourke didn't have time to answer. He was already sprinting for the next piece of cover, knowing that each moment counted. Their survival hinged on how well they could disrupt the alien forces before they brought down the full weight of their invasion. Then, through the crackle of gunfire and the whine of energy beams, Rourke heard something that made his blood run cold. A new sound, a deeper hum, coming from above. Above us! Elias yelled, barely audible. The ground trembled as the massive alien craft descended, its dark shape blotting out the stars. The alien reinforcements had arrived. Rourke's heart skipped a beat. They weren't just fighting for survival now. They were fighting for Earth's future. The ground trembled beneath Rourke's boots as the massive alien craft descended from the heavens, blotting out the stars. The hulking shape of the ship was unlike anything Earth had ever seen, its smooth, jagged surface gleaming in the flashes of gunfire. It hovered with unnerving precision, casting long shadows over the war-torn streets below. There was no mistaking it now, humanity was not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for everything. Carter, woo, fall back! Rourke shouted, his voice sharp as a crack of thunder. We need to regroup. Now! Private Elias Carter, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, nodded quickly, his hands shaking as he shifted his rifle to a more manageable position. His wide eyes flickered between the alien ship above them and Rourke, but he didn't hesitate. He'd been a kid hours ago, an eager, nervous rookie, but that was before. Now, he was a soldier. They ran, ducking behind debris as explosions continued to rain down from the sky. The alien craft above emitted a low, pulsing hum, like the beating of an unseen heart. The air crackled with energy, and Rourke's skin prickled, as though every atom in his body sensed the imminent danger. The team found cover in a nearby alley, their breaths heavy as they crouched low to the ground. Rourke's eyes darted over the landscape, calculating their next move. The aliens were advancing quickly, their reinforcements overwhelming, but the fight wasn't lost, not yet. Humanity was resilient. They had something the aliens didn't, the unbreakable will to survive. We're not giving up here, Rourke muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. His gaze settled on Elias, who was trying to catch his breath, his face pale from the adrenaline. Elias met his eyes, determination hardening his features. What's the plan, sir? Rourke paused for a moment, looking up at the alien ship that loomed overhead like a dark god, waiting to strike. The pulse of its energy shield flickered, a low hum reverberating through the city. He knew that, if they didn't act quickly, it would be too late. We've got to take down that ship. It's the source of their command network. Without it, they'll lose coordination. The aliens won't be able to direct their forces. Wu, still hunched over her device, looked up from her tablet. Her brow was furrowed, eyes sharp. I'm getting a signal, she said, voice quiet but steady. There's a weak spot in the ship's hull, a vulnerable point. I can't crack it from here, but if we get close enough, I can plant an EMP. That'll disable their shield long enough for us to get in. Rourke considered this for a moment, his mind racing. They didn't have much time. The enemy was closing in, and every minute they wasted meant more lives lost. His eyes flicked over to the distant, shifting shadows of the alien forces. He could feel the tension in the air, thick with anticipation. How close do we need to be? Rourke asked, his voice tight. Closer than we'd like, Wu replied. It's a risky shot, but it's our best chance. Elias swallowed, his mouth dry. What are we waiting for, then? Rourke clapped a hand on Elias's shoulder, the weight of his grip grounding the younger soldier. Stick with me, Carter. Stay low. Stay sharp. Without waiting for a response, Rourke led the charge, moving out from their cover, crouching low as they sprinted toward the wreckage of a collapsed building. The echoes of gunfire surrounded them, and alien voices, cold, mechanical, buzzed through the air. The streets had become a battlefield, the tension rising like a tidal wave that threatened to crush them all. "Stay focused," Rourke commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. They moved in a tight formation, their footfalls muted against the cracked pavement. Rourke could feel the weight of the moment in his chest, a constant pressure that made it hard to breathe. They were outgunned. They were outnumbered. But they weren't out of options. Not yet. As they neared the ship, Rourke's heart pounded louder, matching the rhythmic hum of the alien vessel. He could see the vulnerability Wu had mentioned, a faint crack in the otherwise impenetrable shield. It was small, barely visible, but it was their ticket. "Wu, we're almost there," Rourke called out. "Ready?" She nodded, her eyes dark with focus. "Give me the signal." Rourke's gaze locked on the crack, the small weakness in the enemy's armor. It felt like an eternity before he gave the command. "Now," he whispered. Wu sprinted forward, her hands steady despite the chaos. She knelt by the nearest piece of debris and worked quickly, her fingers flying across the device as if her life depended on it, because it did. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness, the crackling hum of the alien ship's energy shield filling the air. And then... boom! The EMP detonated, sending a shockwave through the ship. The shield flickered and collapsed, leaving the vessel vulnerable. Rourke's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was their chance. "Go!" he shouted. They broke from cover, charging toward the ship, weapons raised, hearts pounding. The air was thick with anticipation, the world moving in slow motion. Their lives, humanity's survival, rested on a single, desperate chance. The alien forces regrouped, and the sky erupted in fire. But they were no longer running from the tide, they were meeting it head-on. The world had become a battlefield of fire and fury. Each breath Rourke took was sharp, each heartbeat a thud in his chest. His team was now on the precipice of something monumental, the final assault. The alien ship loomed above them, crippled but still menacing. The shield had failed, but it wasn't enough to declare victory. Rourke's pulse quickened as he glanced at his team. Wu, her face set in hard lines, was scanning the ship's vulnerable core on her device, her fingers trembling but steady as she worked. Elias Carter, his rifle held at the ready, stood tall but weary, his shoulders heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. The air crackled with tension, thick with the remnants of alien energy, the smell of burning debris, and the sharp tang of sweat. Above them, the ship thrummed, its engines sputtering as it tried to recover from the EMP blast. "We're running out of time," Rourke muttered. "Once they regroup, we won't have another shot at this." Wu nodded, barely looking up from her screen. "I'm almost there, just a few more seconds." Rourke looked over his shoulder. The horizon was filled with the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving city. Now, it was a ghost town, scorched, shattered, and silent except for the echoes of the ongoing war. But despite the destruction, humanity was still here. They hadn't given up. Not yet. "Let's move," Rourke barked. "We don't have a moment to waste." They advanced quickly, moving from one pile of rubble to the next, keeping low and out of sight. As they neared the base of the alien ship, the hum of its engines grew louder, vibrating through Rourke's bones. The ground trembled beneath them. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. "You're close, Wu?" Elias asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "Closer," she replied, eyes still glued to the device in her hands. "Give me 2 more minutes." 2 minutes. Rourke didn't know if they had that long. The longer they delayed, the more likely the aliens would regroup and mount a counterattack. Every second felt like an eternity. Then came the first strike. A series of high-pitched whines sliced through the air, followed by an explosion that rattled the ground beneath their feet. The alien forces had found them. "Get down!" Rourke shouted, pulling Elias and Wu behind cover just as another barrage of fire rained down from above. The ground shook with the force of the blasts. Heat washed over them, followed by a deafening roar. Rourke's heart pounded in his ears. He peered around the corner, watching as alien drones surged forward, their metal bodies gleaming in the dim light. "They're not giving up," Rourke growled. "They're sending everything they've got." The drones were fast, their movements quick and precise. Their weapons crackled with energy as they charged. Rourke knew they couldn't wait any longer. The EMP had given them an opening, but it wouldn't hold forever. "Woo!" Rourke barked. "Now!" Wu didn't hesitate. She sprinted from her position, her eyes focused solely on the target. Rourke saw her finger move over the device one last time. There was a brief pause, and then, click. The ship's core exploded in a burst of blinding light. It was as if the world had gone silent for a moment. Rourke's breath caught in his throat. The alien ship staggered in the air, its engines sputtering as it lost power. A massive crack split its hull, and with it, the steady hum of the invaders' command network died away. For the first time in what felt like years, there was silence, real silence, over the city. But it didn't last. The momentary lull was shattered by the screech of alien fighters as they streaked overhead, their weapons locked on Rourke's team. The victory was short-lived, and the battle was far from over. "Move! Move! Move!" Rourke screamed. The team broke into a full sprint, the remaining alien forces descending on them in waves. Rourke's pulse surged as they charged toward the alien vessel. He could feel the urgency in every step, the weight of his team's survival pressing down on him. The fighters swooped low, unleashing their devastating weapons. The air crackled with the sound of energy blasts as the ground around them erupted in fire. Rourke's hands tightened around his rifle, heart hammering in his chest. "Take them down!" Rourke yelled, his voice booming over the chaos. Elias opened fire, his shots ringing out with precision. Wu followed suit, unleashing a barrage of rapid-fire blasts that shredded alien drones as they came too close. Rourke could see the fear in their eyes, but it was tempered by something else, determination. Humanity might have been outnumbered, but it was never outmatched. They had fought through the darkness, through the impossible, and they would not stop now. The alien drones came at them in relentless waves, but each time they fell, more took their place. Rourke's pulse raced, each breath deeper than the last. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something far greater than that. He was fighting for a future built on the strength of the people who refused to surrender. "We're almost there," Wu shouted, pointing toward the now vulnerable core of the alien ship. The cracks in its hull had spread like veins of fire. "Get to the core," Rourke said, voice harsh. "And end this." They surged forward, weapons raised, pushing through the last wave of resistance. The end was in sight, just one more push. And with that, they would take their final stand.